Good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Lazar. I'm president of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and I want to welcome guests, fellows, and friends to our very important evening tonight. And there are quite a few people online, so welcome to them as well. Before we begin, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping notices for the audience here with us at Prince Philip House. We haven't been informed of any scheduled fire drills. If the alarm goes, please follow Academy staff who will direct you to the nearest exit. As for other surprise noises, please make sure your mobile phones are on silent for the duration of the lecture and the Q&A session. But please feel free to scan the QR code to post questions on Slido for the Q&A session, and to post about the event on social media using the hashtags on the screen. Many of you will know that the Academy has played a leading role in the debate about how to engineer sustainable solutions to the challenges faced by humanity, both in a national and a global context. Indeed, I'm looking around the room, many of you have been deeply involved in this work. We provided advice to government over several decades on future energy policy and how to respond to climate change, drawing on the deep and very broad engineering expertise in our fellowship. Few people have done more to challenge and advance the profession's thinking on long-term sustainability than our speaker this evening, Lord Browne of Madingley. As a leading industrialist and CEO of the world's first super major energy company, he was way ahead of his time in urging the energy sector to develop technologies for a future beyond fossil fuels. As president of our academy from 2006 to 2011, he oversaw a step change in achievement and in our ambition from a respected national academy to a goal-orientated organization with a global vision. And as we were just talking, also a new home here at Prince Philip House. He went on to expand this international outreach as the founding chair of the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering. The QE Prize aims to promote excellence in engineering, inspiring young minds to consider engineering as a career choice, and encouraging engineers to push the boundaries of what is possible. We are going to explore some of those boundaries tonight at what seems like a time of greater uncertainty and change for the world. We are delighted that Lord Browne has made the Academy one of his stops on a worldwide lecture tour taking a fresh look at climate change. Lord Browne, please join us to deliver your lecture.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It really is a very great pleasure to be back here at, dare I say, one of my homes, which is the Royal Academy of Engineering. It really is the most appropriate place that I can think of to discuss the unresolved challenge of climate change today. It's appropriate because this organization is a fellowship of people who work to solve problems using facts, not slogans, not rhetoric, because engineering is grounded not in ideology or politics, but in practicality and commerce. As engineers, we start from reality and look for practical answers, and that's our role in society, and it's a crucial role. So let me start, if I may, with the facts about climate change. Climate change is real, and it is happening now. The impact of a changing climate caused by greenhouse gases from human activity is not a hoax. The level of emissions continues to rise, and the result is a gradual increase in global temperatures and a growing incidence of extreme weather events. We can't predict what those events will bring or where they'll occur, but the evidence around their frequency and seriousness is inescapable. The impact of climate change is evident on water supplies, health, the spread of diseases, and disrupted food supplies. All serious studies suggest that this situation is likely to get worse. We're now 40 years on from the first IPCC report, and the progress in dealing with climate change on the basis of that report is inadequate. We have added more low-carbon energy supplies from wind and solar, but we haven't yet reduced the use of fossil fuels. Across the world, we use 50% more oil, gas and coal than we did 40 years ago. Fossil fuels still meet more than 80% of final energy demand, and renewables only meet just over 4%. As a result, we're passing the 1.5 degree target and heading steadily towards something like 3 degrees. We don't know whether there are tipping points, at which point climate disruption will become an accelerating and irreversible process. But we certainly can't rule that out. It would be a foolish experiment to wait to find out. The search for a globally agreed process to manage the climate through the UN FCCC and other organisations has failed. And it's failed at many private sector corporations who are now walking away from their unrealistic goals. Public and political attention has moved away from climate change to new issues of concern, the cost of living and broken public finances. More significantly, it now seems that there's a fundamental reshaping of the pattern of international relations that we've relied upon throughout my entire lifetime. The risks of war will draw strained public finances into defence. That shift of attention is not surprising. What has happened in the last few weeks represents a wrenching change in geopolitics. Nationalism is the predominant ideology of the moment. International relations are tense, dominated by a cloud of fear about what could happen next. Facts matter less than assertions of strength and will. We could devote a long discussion to the causes of what has happened, but the simple reality is that the prospect of a global deal on climate change with the necessary ambition is now an extremely remote possibility. But of course, climate change continues, completely oblivious to changes in political direction and oblivious to national borders. The risks are all too easily ignored or left for another day. Ignored, but ever present. Ask the people of Los Angeles or the victims of the floods in Germany or Pakistan. These are the facts, but they are not and must not become a counsel of despair. Fatalism is the real enemy. The countervailing fact is that we're making some serious progress towards mitigating climate change. Over the last decade, we've seen a dramatic growth in the use of renewables as sources of electricity, driven by a very sharp fall in costs. Across the world, wind and solar are becoming the first choice for new power generation, more commercially competitive and deliverable than all other available sources of energy, including natural gas. We are using energy more efficiently. The correlation between growth in GDP and growth in demand has radically altered. It used to be 1-to-1. Now energy demand only grows by 0.7 for every 1% increase in GDP. We've begun to develop more efficient ways of producing and using oil and gas, thereby significantly reducing the greenhouse gases related to their production, including the powerful greenhouse gas methane. This achievement is attributable to the larger oil and gas companies, so often painted as villains. We've begun to apply commercially viable ways to reduce greenhouse gases when we use energy in home heating, steel and cement production, transportation and many other sectors. And I believe there's much more awareness of the importance of protecting the environment on which we depend. Climate change may not be at the top of the news agenda, but people are aware of the risks and are looking for constructive solutions. So from these facts, some negative, some positive, we need to find a way forward. We can see that the transformation of an energy system in which hydrocarbons are embedded in this country and around the whole world cannot be delivered overnight or without cost. Some of the national and corporate targets for achieving net zero are not realistic. Some of the potential solutions are presently too expensive. But to say that we cannot achieve everything is not to say that we can achieve nothing. So, what can be done? There are 4 imperatives. First, we must continue to deploy the many technologies which are already commercially available. For example, wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, reuse of materials, and systems to improve energy efficiency. Investing in these will make a difference and will slow down any further climate deterioration. Secondly, we need to invest in the next generation of low-carbon technologies. The recurring challenge is to scale them up and to reduce their costs, to make the decarbonisation of electricity, industrial heat systems and industrial processes practical and affordable. The to-do list is long. Reduce the costs of CCS and CDR, develop long-duration energy storage, make lower-cost nuclear a real proposition, and develop applications of AI which could radically improve the efficiency of energy, cities and land use systems. We need to develop processes that will speed up nature's natural way of absorbing carbon in oceans and plants. And we need to find new enzymes that could make fuels from plant matter. We're clearly not investing enough in this country or globally, and the money we are investing is probably too scattered, creating a host of fragmented projects which don't offer material solutions. Energy research funding needs to be focused behind a small number of core objectives. And of course, we should do that through cooperation. I think the phrase of the moment is a coalition of the willing. At home, we must recognise that the UK government can't fund everything. COVID fundamentally damaged the public finances, and there are clearly both multiple legitimate demands for public spending, including defence, and unavoidable limits on borrowing. That makes the role of the private sector, private corporations, crucial. They clearly need incentives which, one way or another, value the greenhouse gases avoided, for example with carbon credits or penalties on methane emissions, to generate appropriate returns. The energy companies must be at the heart of that. The world will need oil and gas for some time to come. The oil and gas companies should focus on things that they can do now, capturing all methane leaks and implementing geologic carbon capture and storage. But I believe that there is also scope for the development, quite separately, of a distinct low-carbon business which looks to the future, a new super major which is beyond petroleum. Those are 2 different growth and return propositions which will attract 2 different sets of investors. It would be great to see such a low-carbon business developed here in the UK, pulling together and focusing what is happening, working with governments to undertake focused research and build low-carbon companies which can serve the world. And the transformation in global politics makes it even more important that we do take a lead here in the UK. I was in the US a few weeks ago. Low-carbon activity is being cut back. Funding is being reduced. I find that regrettable, but I also find it the strongest possible reason for us in the UK, in our universities and in the corporate sector, to step up the work which needs to be done. The opportunity for global leadership in this area is ours to seize. The third imperative is to build resilience. We've not solved climate change, and we don't know what will happen next. Extreme weather can destroy whole communities. We now have available systems that use both physical models and AI to predict local occurrences of wildfires and floods, and to lay out actions to mitigate the consequent damage. These provide essential protection in some US states of the electric grid. We must ensure that this and other infrastructure is appropriately prepared against the risks of serious disruption. In addition, we must examine and develop the options which come under the broad banner of geoengineering, such as solar radiation management. Numerous technologies are being promoted, and they'll need to be tested to confirm their safety and effectiveness and to manage their impact. And that'll particularly apply to the use of fine particles or aerosols in the atmosphere. The key to both these imperatives is targeted investment. Neither can be regarded as commercial or cost-free, but the investment should be seen as an essential insurance policy. Fourthly, I believe we must never forget the human impact of climate change. That will affect everyone, rich or poor, north or south. And the most vivid example of it is the acceleration of human migration. If temperatures rise and water supplies fall, large parts of the world will become uninhabitable. As the latest studies show, average temperature increases are not uniform across the world. The greatest impact is likely to be felt in the band of countries just north of the equator. If areas are uninhabitable, if even basic agriculture is impossible, people will leave. If that happens, the flow of people from areas such as North Africa will outstrip anything we have seen so far. I vividly remember when in 2010 I'd invited the late James Lovelock of the Gaia theory fame to talk to a group of eminent business leaders. At the end of his talk, one man asked about actions to save planet Earth from climate change. His answer was very short and very sharp. Acting will not save the planet. The Earth will look after herself. The action we need to take is to save humanity and to avoid degrading human life. And that answer has shaped my thinking ever since. So 4 imperatives: deployment, research, resilience, and human impact. And in each case, the work of engineers is crucial. Engineers can turn ideas and aspirations into practical working reality. So let's not accept the fashionable fatalistic view, often based on ignorance about the realities of inaction, that the climate agenda is dead. We're probably at least 25 years behind where we should be, but we've begun to see some genuine possibilities for constructive progress. Rather than being fatalistic, we should deploy the technologies which are already available and develop the next generation of solutions which are within reach. Those steps depend on engineers because no one else can deliver the answers. Not politicians, not commentators, not protesters. I cannot think of a time when the work of engineers has been more important. So, ladies and gentlemen, I was actually going to stop the talk just here, but I wanted to add something, if I may, about my own beliefs about our responsibility to humanity. I've worked to mitigate climate change for nearly 30 years. Over that time, the politics have altered dramatically, but my own principles, values, and convictions have remained constant. Beyond petroleum, which was the strapline we used for BP back in the 1990s, wasn't an accidental phrase, and it wasn't a PR slogan. It expressed a long-term view that change is actually essential, a necessary change spelt out by the IPCC and in the groundbreaking Stern report. That change has begun, too slowly and too often without caring enough about people and without carrying them along with the change. That change must continue and must now accelerate, because the alternative is to give in to ignorance and to abandon our responsibility to future generations, to humanity. The world faces many challenges, but climate change is probably the most fundamental of all. This is the clear and present danger of our times. It's crucial to explain what's happening, the risks entailed, and the potential practical solutions. And I'm committed to doing that, and that's why I'm in the process of establishing, with Lord Nick Stern, a new group of policy experts, economists, engineers, and scientists to ensure that the arguments are made and repeated again and again, and the cause is not lost in the noise and confusion of the moment. There is so much we can do simultaneously to cut emissions, build resilience, and make our world much healthier and safer by investing to create a new prosperity for ourselves and those who follow. I'm delighted to have found great support for the idea from a group of people who share my fundamental belief that we can't be the generation which have given up the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lord Browne, for what I'm sure all of those listening will agree was a very stimulating and, if you'll excuse the pun, energising lecture. I am, for those who don't know me, Hayatan Sulim. I'm the CEO here at the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering Foundation. And it's my pleasure to be hosting the discussion session. So I know that you have all now been informed that we are taking questions through Slido. Please do add your questions at any time and use the upvote function to let us know which questions you are most interested in hearing the answer to. But I'm going to kick things off with a couple of questions of my own, Lord Browne. The first question is, I think it was 2006, wasn't it, that you started here as president of the Academy, and already at that time you were very active in championing awareness of climate change. So we're nearly 20 years on from that, and I'm interested to know whether we are further ahead, further behind, or about where you would have predicted we might be at this point.
So I said in my talk that I think we're about 25 years behind where we should be, roughly. If you look at where things were lined out in the Rio meeting in the mid-90s to today, it's very clear that a lot of slippage. But interestingly, I kind of went back to the year 2000 when I was talking a lot about this when I was running BP. At that time, you couldn't ring someone up and say, could I build a solar farm? Or could I build a wind farm? Actually, it was not possible. Yeah. The stuff didn't exist. And actually, BP, to its eternal credit in this way, rather than realizing you can't get solar panels, decided to build solar panels themselves, which is not what an oil and gas company should be doing. But nonetheless, it was a brave experiment. So a lot of things has therefore changed. I think what is very exciting is the number of people of great merit who've come into the activity of doing something to change the way in which industrial processes, business processes, and energy work in the world to make sure that we can reduce greenhouse gases. So all of that is, I think, a big change. What hasn't changed is the up and down nature of the commitment of the public interest to this activity. It goes up and comes down. I've been through plenty of waves of this, plenty of waves in the last 30 years.
Well, I'm pretty sure someone's going to ask us a question about that, so I'll park that one for a minute. But actually, maybe building out from there, my second question before I get on to the Slido questions, which I can see are coming through thick and fast now, is about optimism. So I think your talk was a welcome injection of optimism at a time when the world is quite confusing, and as you pointed out, some of us perhaps have succumbed to the dangers of fatalism. And I'm interested as to what fuels your optimism and whether you think optimism is important for tackling climate change.
Well, I suppose part of it's my fundamental natural makeup, which almost certainly I credit to my mother, who, having amazingly survived the Holocaust and never looked back, but only looked forward. And I think that's a very important point. I've been through a couple of changes myself. One, I guess, is realizing that energy isn't just about oil and gas. It's about everything. And when I started talking about that, I would say, with the single exception of one other well-known company located in London in the oil and gas business, the criticism was gigantic, and that was no good. And you know, I came out as gay late in my life, and I thought that was the end of the world, and I realized very quickly, no, it's not. There's always a great new chapter of things, because the human condition is to build for the future. It's just there. It just needs to be led in the right direction. Otherwise, people look at their shoes and say, gosh, what am I going to do next? What am I next? But actually, there's tons to do. And of course, things that you do don't necessarily have to be applied immediately. And maybe the missing ingredient to get things applied is some political action that's missing today. But why not get ready for tomorrow? Because sure as anything happens, there will be a wave. It'll be a change. There'll be something that happens that makes what you do highly relevant for the future. And if you and something also that we can't tell happens. I always remind myself that in science and engineering, the unexpected is the norm. You know, there are things that happen outside that we can't possibly understand. And you see every day, little things like, not so little, a change in the way we want to use AI models, smaller models, less energy absorbing, very different ways of doing it. DeepSeek came along and everyone was shocked. Now, of course, there are going to be lots of DeepSeeks and better DeepSeeks, and our view of what sort of energy balance we need to drive data centers will continuously change. And you know that because there's a big, if I look at this very simply, I say that when there's such a big gap between what you need and what you've got, so supply and demand, something happens to bring them together. It just always happens. It may not happen immediately, and so but it happens sometime. That's why I'm an optimist.
What a wonderful answer, ranging from the personal to the global in scale, and probably what we all needed on a day when some of us are grappling with the news. I'm going to move on to audience questions, because there's some great questions coming in, and I'm taking my steer from the ones which are being upvoted as being the ones that are most interesting to the audience at large. So first question is from Azim. How can we make the economics of climate change more compelling? I firmly believe that without financial incentives, businesses will not be motivated to take action.
Well, you're partly right. I mean, industry needs, if things aren't economic, they need some help to make them work. But if things are economic, then industry doesn't hold back. There's either someone who's going to do it or someone's going to create something that will use whatever we find. So in my book, I think the single most important thing we have to do is to work on processes that reduce cost. We have to do that. This is no exception. This is like any other piece of innovation and business. We have to reduce costs. So there are plenty of things we can do. The use of energy around the world remains very inefficient. And I've found in my own experience plenty of businesses to go and invest in and change and grow that simply improve efficiency. Think about it as productivity. And productivity reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Like one thing follows the other. So this can be done, and there's plenty to do. You've just got to find it. And sometimes it's just looking at a business that's working today and saying, actually, my view of it is different. I can look at it differently, and I can make it work much more efficiently. Secondly, we, as human beings, we're not very good at conserving materials. You know, we tend to use things and throw them away. So there are some things that are too valuable to throw away. I picked an obvious example, tires. I think everybody knows that there's a mountain of used tires that's growing every day, and it grows partly because electric vehicles have higher acceleration, and when the rubber hits the road, it leaves the rubber on the road. So the question is what to do, and the answer has often been put them in a landfill or burn them. Neither of these is appropriate for the environment. But you can actually reprocess them. And with the right type of IP, you can create things that definitely avoid a large amount of carbon and produce wonderful things like the flooring of great baseball courts or huge stadiums. And I'm talking directly about what a business that I have does. So it's very clear you can do it. So I think, that's what I call effectiveness. Yep. The other thing is, I mentioned it in my talk, if you can stop some things happening and you can do it with profit for somebody, then it's really good for the environment. One of which might be, how do you stop a wildfire happening? How do you stop a wildfire happening? And it's quite by analyzing what actually starts a wildfire and then looking at them all over the world and then trying to understand what it is we need, what data we need to work out when a wildfire happens. It's amazing what you can do nowadays with these definitely inference models in AI based on a lot of data and some physical modeling. That allows you to work out when a wildfire could happen and then taking preventive steps to stop it. So imagine applying that to all over the world. That would be marvelous. You won't stop them all, but you can stop an awful lot because there's a pattern of activity.
Some great examples there. I'm going to move us on to the next question. Jackie has asked, which I'm sure is on many people's minds, following the recent adjustment of many oil and gas major strategies, some say that oil and gas companies have lost their credibility in terms of their role in making progress towards the energy transition. What's your perspective on this?
So I think I'd like to think about it slightly differently. It would be great if every company did what they could to reduce greenhouse gases in a rational way with a great target that they could actually meet. Not many companies can get to that point. And when you look at what companies have been saying around the world, a lot of them can't do what they said they're going to do. That's not true everywhere, and some very great companies are doing just exactly what they said they're going to do. And it tends to be the larger companies rather than the smaller companies that are actually doing, sort of getting to target. So oil and gas companies are, by nature, producers of oil and gas. I'm going to sound Fred tautology, but it's sort of true. It's a bit like, a company that makes nails or screws is a company that makes nails or screws, and it should do it better and better every day. So oil and gas companies will continue to produce oil and gas, and we will consume it until we find other ways of powering the world. And I mean now a global problem. But oil and gas companies, if they're performing very well in their base business, are permitted by investors to diversify a bit. Not a lot, but some. Experiment to see what you can do and see if you can provide something that maybe someone else can take on for the future. The moment your base business is imperiled, all bets are off. And it's true about almost any company that wants to diversify. And diversifying out of oil and gas into different forms of energy, notably electricity, is really a diversification. And it takes a lot of new skills, a new consistency. And that business generally has lower returns, sometimes low risk, not always, than oil and gas. And so difficult to fit two things into one vehicle. I'm afraid 3 years ago, I was asked by the FT what I thought. I summarized it as saying either non-fossil fuel parts of oil and gas companies will succeed, in which case they should be spun off, or they will fail, in which case they should be closed down. But they can't really stay where they are. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Thank you. It's an interesting perspective, and maybe just slightly different angle of looking at what's happening in the US, where clearly there's a wholesale shift going on in terms of the targets and narrative that companies are perhaps able to use in relation to climate. Do you see a fundamental shift in their strategy underpinning that, or do you think it's more about the presentational dimension?
So first, I think in the oil and gas companies, I think there really is a big difference between big companies and small companies. Small companies have very few degrees of freedom. Big companies tend to be represented around the world. So I like to say to my American friends that, when I was working in the US, everyone referred to the US and then the rest of the world. Today, I think we should think about it as most of the world and the US. There's quite a big difference which has happened here. So I think a lot of people say, well, we're over the world. I think the large companies, as far as I can tell, in the oil and gas business are doing exactly what they said they were going to do, and they're carrying on. And they're doing things like, how do you cut down the emissions of methane? It's one of the most powerful levers people could pull, and still continuing to work on what are very, very expensive processes to store carbon dioxide through geologic storage. And it's not the story. I think there'll be other techniques to do that. But I think the other companies, are very sensitive to their customer base. People want companies to be responsible. They want them to be in tune with nature. They don't want to pay for it, but they do want them to be doing just that. So every company is trying to figure out how to do that and do it at a lower cost so that it doesn't actually increase the cost of goods to the consumer. And I think that is very possible.
Thank you. I'm going to move the focus now to sentiment again. There's a question from Nick here that's talking about the sense of overwhelm that young people can feel, and the fact that young people may have a sort of emotional desire to make a contribution to reduce climate change, but won't necessarily know where to begin. And I suppose I'd add to that this sort of, the tendency for some of the education around climate change to leave people feeling scared rather than empowered. So what would you like to see in terms of the advice that young people are getting?
Well, first, I see this. I speak to a lot of family offices. These are groups of people who have money from a family that they have to invest. And so they're not they're not big investment companies like Fidelity and, sort of LNG and people like that are welcome. And it's quite surprising how the level of understanding of climate change is reasonably superficial, and it can boil down to, okay, well, we can't make 1.5 degrees, we can make 3, it's going to get hotter, and either, we're all going to be fine in the US, we've got lots of air conditioning, or else it's going to happen elsewhere, and right now, it could be bad, and there's no solution. In some ways, they look at this and say, I think we figure out that we agree with climate change, but we don't know what to do next. So I think breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, which is, let's think about how we can deploy more of what we know works commercially today, and that will improve. Secondly, deploy people into creating something for the future. Creating something for the future. It's not as if in the rest of the world, money from philanthropic organizations and governments has stopped going into universities for research. Quite the reverse. There are some exceptions, but maybe they'll be worked out eventually. So I think, secondly, there's an area to work there. And thirdly, I think to think about how we can educate people that can educate other people. I think that's really important. My answer to everyone is try and find something to do, something very practical to do. I'd say that as an engineer, but it certainly does change sentiment if you can actually do something, really do something. Join a business that is recycling something. Join a business that's improving efficiency. There's just so much that could be done, so much that could be done.
Very helpful. I'm going to now move to a topic which I think is getting a lot of airtime for good reason, which is the interaction between AI and climate change. So the specific question here is, what are your thoughts on the energy consumption of training large AI models versus the benefits they bring in addressing climate problems?
So first, I think the most important thing is that they will bring huge benefits because we'll be able to basically see things that we can see further faster. And that's what we've all tried to do all the time. And that's what AI allows us to do. And I have plenty of examples of how that's actually working in business today, really producing results. Now, the question of data centers. So I think there's certainly been an awful lot in the press. From Microsoft wanting to restart an old nuclear, set of nuclear reactors, through to people saying, build more gas-fired power generation. Probably neither is going to really work that way, in my judgment. As a matter of example, if you wanted to build a gas-fired power station in the United States today, it would take you a little while to build. And I'm not talking about permits. It's just actually finding a gas turbine to put into it. I think many OEMs have been building gas turbines in the past, and they've been burnt badly. They've seen this movie before, and they're saying, I'm not sure we want to do this time. So there are lots of issues. So I think what's happening, I've seen companies, so this requires cooperation. I've seen companies clearly say, if we could only put all the servers in liquid, 100% liquid, then we could transfer the heat much faster. And indeed, that can be done, and there's lots of liquids you could use, and it's a pretty straightforward piece of chemical engineering to do, and you can transfer the heat very, very effectively, rather better than with gases. The problem is you need cooperation of the people who make servers to make sure that the glue doesn't come undone if it's exposed to liquid. So it's basically as simple as that. So that's one point, get rid of some heat. Secondly, how about researching the whole time to get the right processor for the right activity. Don't use one size fits all. Use different processes, less heat. And thirdly, how about use? Use. This is where I think DeepSeek made the point that we don't all need to do what we're doing today. There's a much more sophisticated way of breaking the problem down, using different vehicles for different things, for training, for inference, small models, large models. It's always the case. And constraints make people think how to use it. When I did hands-on work in this area a long, long time ago, I did finite difference modeling on a very big scale. And the computers were awful. They were terrible. And this was in 1972, where the biggest computers, there were very few of them, and even BP didn't have one. We had to go down and use one at NASA Ames in California. And the reason I say this is we fitted the problem to what we had. And so we used small models, we figured out what to do so that we could actually get something done. And I think we'll see some of that happening. It's not to say we won't need more power, we will. I was speaking to the head of a very important utility in the United States a couple of weeks ago, who turned to me and said, you know, we were listening to a lot of you said, he said, again, we can increase the efficiency of the grid hugely. And we have ways of doing that. Combination of sensors and simulation, a digital twin of the grid itself. This will make a very big difference. And I think it will. Not to say there are no problems, but I think the demand and supply will converge. They have to converge. That's what life is about. Supply and demand have to converge. So slowly that will happen, I believe.
Thank you very much, Lord Browne. I can't resist giving a plug to our recent report on responsible AI, which looks at those sort of specific examples of how we do improve the sustainability of AI, and there are many design choices available to us. So very helpful. I'm now going to try and turn our attention to the global picture. And there's a question here that's been upvoted by many people. It says, given the rise of nationalism in various countries, how likely is it that one nation's climate actions will significantly impact global progress? And how might this affect international cooperation on climate goals?
Well, it's obviously very high chance because there are no walls around any country. And this is a single climate, and what one country does will affect another. But it will also affect the country that affects the other people. So the good news is that everybody will be in it together. They may just be out of sync with each other. I think if you look at China, you know, China always gets a bad rap on so many things nowadays, but actually their 5-year plans and what they're doing about emissions, basically they kind of hit every time they publish. And so they're in a stately progress to get emissions down. It doesn't look like it because coal is still being burnt there, but actually I think there are plenty of things going on. And the same is true with India. In India's big coal burn, but you know their target is to build 20 gigawatts of renewables a year. There are 12 at the moment, which is not bad, just a start, and I'm sure they'll get that. And they'll get there incidentally by making almost all the equipment they need to get there in India. I've seen that myself. I've been to several of these sites already. So I think there will be ups and downs. And then I think people will begin to incentivize by putting in some form of carbon adjustment at the border. And that will push people. This, on a day like today, I hate to say it, it's an addition to tariffs. But we have to see how all that works out at the moment. But you know, bringing other people's carbon into your country is not what should happen. And so I think there will be something which will happen. Do I think there'll be some universal solution to this and one price for carbon globally? Absolutely not.
Well, we managed to get 49 minutes in without mentioning the T word, so that's an achievement of sorts. I'm going to quickly add on Malcolm's question, sort of as an extension to what we're discussing, which is what should be done to improve the chances of success in international collaboration on the UNFCCC process, given its vital role in addressing climate change?
Well, you can do what you can do. I mean, I hate to say that, but I think the work on the technical panels must continue, even though some people won't be there. Not everyone was there at the beginning anyway. And so I think we just got to make do. What we shouldn't do is gnash our teeth and say, gosh, we can't do anything because Joe isn't there or Sue isn't there, or not to mention any nations, but it's just, we just shouldn't do it. We just got to carry on. And I think we should carry on. I think we might want to think about simplifying some of the international processes. I have in mind COP. I think it probably lost a bit of its total point here. And I think it could be, if I were running it, which I'm not, I would suggest we rationalize the activity and focus it to some specific deliverables every year, not try and do everything at once. But I would say that as a businessman.
Well, I'm going to tag on one more question on a similar theme, which is, are the SDGs now essentially discredited? And should we be attempting to have a new iteration of globally agreed climate missions?
So I think the SDGs are fine, but it's very difficult, I think, for someone to keep in their head getting on for 20 different objectives. So some are good for one set of people, other goods for other people. They really shouldn't be regarded, I think, as as a whole basket for everybody. I can't remember them all, I have to say. I like to think that people focus on one or two things. Certainly businesses need to focus on one or two things. I've focused my businesses on two things. One is making money for investors. The second one is reducing, and they're both equal, reducing greenhouse gases in line with actually exceeding science-based targets, always exceeding science-based targets. So these two things, I think, keep you on point and focused on what you do. So I do think, we tend, I remember I still have plenty of businesses I chair, and I notice occasionally CEOs getting a bit of pushback from their team when there are 18 objectives. Because people will correctly say, well, CEO, what else can I do other than look at these objectives? I've got a business to run as well. So keeping the most important things in focus is the way to go. And it may well be that the changes we're seeing happening in the world today might actually make us focus a bit more onto the things that really, really matter. And of course, the big thing that really matters about climate change is humanity. How are we doing? Are we still taking people out of poverty, 50 million a year? Are we keeping them out of poverty? Are we keeping them healthy? Are we stopping diseases which exist in the rest of the world coming back into Europe, which is happening? Are we stopping people wanting to leave land because it's no longer productive, etc., etc.?
Thank you. And I feel that since we're at the Royal Academy of Engineering, we should have the final questions focused on engineers and engineering. So we're coming towards the end of our time, so we're going to need to be relatively concise. But the first question is from Michael, who's asking, do you consider a lack of engineers and technologists to be a significant risk to achieving net zero?
I do, but I also think that we can generate lots of engineers and technologists. I really do. So I've never believed that supply is fixed when demand goes up. The supply increases, and we just got to get round to it.
Well, and just for reassurance, the Academy is very much committed to being part of that effort.
I gave you that line.
Yes, it was received gratefully, Lord Browne. And then,
can I just say,
yes,
it needs also to be fit for purpose for the future, you know. So there are clearly things going on. We lack enough nuclear engineers. We need more nuclear engineers. We need people who actually understand the engineering of things like electrochemistry. So big changes. We need to understand engineers that can apply AI to both things which live, like proteins and enzymes, but then take them into the lab to test them out. I pick a few things like this. These are really important areas.
And we also need sustainability literacy embedded in our engineering education. The last question is from Tony, who says, how can engineers overcome the barriers we face in getting our message across, for example, to policymakers and funders and investors, about what really works and what does not? And I can't think of a better person to ask than you, bearing in mind you straddle all these worlds.
So I want to, this doesn't sound clear, I really want everyone to support the Royal Academy of Engineering, because it's one of the most powerful, and it should remain even more powerful, focal point for saying what engineering can actually do for society. I think at every point it's worth just demonstrating what engineering is doing today, and asking the question of everybody, you know, whether you're in discovery science, in translation, or in commercialization. How do you actually apply engineering to get from discovery to translation, and from translation to application? It doesn't matter what you're doing, whether that is at the Crick Institute, where we do just that, or whether it is in a business that is taking a better way of making cement and actually commercializing it at the same price and getting it out to the market. So it's all about, it's certainly engineering thinking, and chances are it's almost certainly engineering application.
Well, Lord Browne, I have to thank you on behalf of our audience for an incredibly powerful and empowering talk and discussion this evening. We have ranged far and wide, from technology to tariffs, from the personal to the politics, from the local to the global. And at the heart of all of that, you keep reminding us that this is really about humanity. And that is an unbelievably important and galvanizing point for us to focus our attention on as we think about where we go from here, with your call to action, reminding us that we all have agency and we all can deploy that in support of this most important cause. I would like to thank Lord Browne for such an insightful lecture, for being so generous and answering so many questions, and most of all to thank you for your leadership on this issue of our time. Can we thank Lord Browne in the usual way?
Thank you.
And I would also like to thank everyone who's joined us, both in the room and online. Your questions were excellent. They made my job incredibly easy, and made sure that Lord Browne got his money's worth from this evening. So thank you all for engaging with us tonight. For those of you joining us online, we bid you good evening. And for those of you in the room, you're most welcome to come and join us for a drink in the Euro Foundation room where you gathered before the event. So thank you again, and we look forward to welcoming you at a future Academy event in the near future. Good evening, everyone.